It had been 2 years since I last visited this place, far too long. To me, this is what Walden was to Thoreau. The quote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when it came time to die, discover that I had not lived," is never more meaningful than when I set foot in this place. The reasons for my absence are ones that I hope to never use again. Working too much, little interest, apathy, poor mood. I find that these reasons often spiral and compound until you break the spiral, which in my case is forcing myself into an adventure. It is a remote area, accessible only to those who wish and are capable of putting in a decent amount of effort. The first part of the journey went smoothly, mainly along the still water of the lake's edge, and eventually I made it into the river system. The paddle upriver took some doing, but technically the first part of the river wasn't that difficult. Several portages line the route to bypass several moderately intense rapids that are above my pay grade to try and shoot. There is no cell phone reception, no people to contact should anything go south, and approximately 3 hours by water or foot to the nearest dirt road, and another 8 to 10 kilometers to the first pavement road. I'd been here many times in the past, but this was the first time I'd ever gone solo and by kayak. I enjoyed the kayak as it was maneuverable in the river, making it much more easy to dodge rocks, and its light weight made the portages a significantly better experience. Once I arrived at base camp, I got my shelter set up, ate some lunch, and decided to try my hand at a bit of fishing. Shortly after landing my first fish, a humble 4-inch brook trout, disaster struck. In my carelessness, I had dropped my fishing rod out of my kayak, and it sunk faster than my optimism that this trip would go any further. I cried on the shoreline for several minutes, then I decided I would try to make a replacement. I fashioned a rod from an old beaver chew, made eyelets from some snare wire I'd packed, and some line from the inner strands of a length of paracord. Turns out it worked pretty well, and I caught myself enough trout for dinner. I made my way back to base camp and cooked them over an open fire on a nice hearth that someone had built since the last time I'd been here. It worked well, and I ate them all that night by the river. I fashioned a chair out of some cedar saplings and a bit of paracord. It sure beat the heck out of standing or crouching or kneeling on the cold, wet ground the entire time. Later that evening, I mellowed out of my tent, wrapped myself securely in my sleeping bag, and let the sounds of the river lull me to sleep. It truly was a relaxing experience, one that I don't take for granted. I awoke to a far colder morning than I had expected. A heavy frost had set in. I brewed some coffee and sat by the fire to warm up. I got myself hydrated and ate some breakfast and prepared myself for another full day of fishing. It seemed that the sun was bright, and I hoped that the day would soon warm up. I was optimistic that today would be an even better day of fishing than I had the day before. Once the sun crested the eastern ridge, it quickly became one of those rare spring days when you can acquire a sunburn if you're not careful. It was an absolutely perfect day, picturesque, almost out of a poem. The fish were jumping around me, the sounds of the birds, the sun, all coordinated themselves into a moment of pure bliss that I will always cherish. Despite all this, I had a weird, uneasy feeling that I didn't quite understand until about 36 hours into the trip. It was the fact that I'd never been here before the deciduous trees had put out their leaves. The landscape had a different feel to it, a lifelessness that I guess I wasn't used to. The rod continued to work well on day 2. I cast it as if it was a fly line, having my working line pooling around my feet, and honestly I was able to get it out up to 25 feet with a bit of effort. Aside from the occasional tangle of my line, I had no complaints. It seemed the fish didn't have any complaints either, as I was able to limit out on a nice string of 9 to 12-inch trout. I passed a large beaver lodge on my way home to base camp. I admired its construction, its size and beauty on the landscape. It was early afternoon when I returned to base camp. I spent like an hour cutting up a bit of firewood for the evening, and then I proceeded to roast all of my trout. I ate them in one gluttonous episode, much resembling Gollum crouched by the river, eating the trout with my bare hands, ferally. And then I turned in for the night. The next morning was quite a bit warmer than the previous, although it had rained quite significantly overnight. I again brewed some more coffee and prepared to pack up camp and hit the river, heading south and back into civilization. After 2 days, I'd settled into the natural rhythm of this landscape quite well. I almost grieved returning back to my normal life. The unfortunate reality that I wouldn't be able to spend more time out here is just something that I have difficulty wrestling with. The thoughts that I'd have to return to emails, deadlines, and fluorescent lighting just so that I can be financially stable irritates me. I wish there was an alternative to this, but unfortunately that's the reality that we find ourselves in modern society. My one reprieve is to accumulate as many memories of these moments as possible so that I can reflect on them and maintain my resilience in the world. This truly is what life is all about for me. I will always love being out here.